you so much, Chris, for sharing your expertise with us. I want to shift over to some of the questions that people have provided. And I know that this is a topic that a lot of people have questions about. And one of the questions that we see here, someone was asking, what if one person doesn't want a resolution to a conflict? I think that's a very common scenario. And if that's the case, is there a way, or is there a way or no way? How do we manage that kind of situation?
In most cases, everybody wants to resolve a conflict because no one wants to have those feelings, those uncomfortable feelings that they're going to. So in some instances, like I said earlier, whether it's fight or flight, they are going to want to get out of that conflict. I promise you that. So if you find that you have someone that's very combative, that's always wanting to be in conflict, one of the things you can do is to make sure you don't push back, because as I demonstrated earlier, as long as you've got the pushback, there's going to be conflict. But if one person decides to walk away or even use questioning techniques to get that person out of their feelings, because that's where they are, that's probably why they can't resolve the conflict, is because they can't get out of the emotion.
And so, so for your suggestion is that for some of those cases, you have to just walk away, because that's just not going to be your ability to kind of change someone's behavior yourself.
Right. There are about 4 reactions to conflicts. One is competing or confronting. The other one is compromising. The other one is avoiding conflict, and also being collaborative in conflict. And in most cases, when people are competing or confronting or avoiding conflict, it's all about themselves. It's all about how that conflict is making me feel. I got to fight back or I got to walk away. But if you're compromising, you're saying, okay, I see your point of view, but here's my point of view. Let's decide which one works best for us. The other one is collaborating. Let's talk about what are some options that we can use to resolve this conflict. All of those things are not good when you use them all the time. If you're compromising all the time, just going along to get along, you're going to run into more conflict. If you're always fighting it out and competing and confronting, you're going to always be in conflict. If you're always avoiding and running away, it's going to eventually end up being bad for you as well, because you're not actually resolving the conflict. So if you're trying to either compromise or be more collaborative, that's looking at the other person and yourself. You're working on what works best for you and what works best for the other person.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. Thank you for that answer, Chris. Another question that came in is asking, can conflict be resolved in a group setting, or must it be done one-on-one? What's your thought about that, or suggestion for that?
Absolutely, group settings are great. That's what I call a facilitation. I may have a group, say for instance, a church. I've done a lot of church facilitations where everybody comes together, the major people that need to be there, and we go through a process of looking at what is the conflict, what's going on here, and where do you want to go? And so I go through a process with people as a facilitator to work towards a resolution.
So it sounds like some cases group setting might work and others one-on-one might be better. So it kind of depends.
It depends. It just depends on, because basically when you have a group setting and I'm facilitating a group, it's usually individuals that might be a part of the problem. And so there may be times during the facilitation that I may need to meet with people individually to bring them back to the group.
Excellent, thank you. Another question is asking, just to clarify, during your present or sharing, the more specific information on conflict. Someone was asking, did you say that anger can lead to memory loss? Or asking that.
Yes, absolutely. If you ever, I used to work as an ombudsman in long-term care and assisted living facilities. And for the most part, when I have worked with people with memory loss, Alzheimer's, dementia type issues, their families have always said, you know, well, they were different when before all of this occurred. And what normally happens is we start to lose that part of our brain that we're not actually using when we're in conflict. If we're not resolving that conflict, it's staying somewhere. It's manifesting itself somewhere in our physical bodies. And so it could actually lead to memory loss because we're not using our brains. We're mostly using our feelings and our emotions.
Okay. Another question is there a link between diet and conflict?
Yes, because if you're not maintaining a good diet, it could cause that brain fog as well. So I think being healthy, taking walks, eating right, eating your fruits and your vegetables in a balance will help keep the brain open and ready to maybe think about managing conflict a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you on that because a lot of the food, so parts of our brains require neurotransmitters, which are molecules that act on receptors to allow our cells to function and send messages. And a lot of those neurotransmitters come directly from the food that we eat. So there's definitely a link between what we eat and its impact on our brain, because our brain is a part of the body. So there's no way that our nutrition doesn't have an impact. So I agree with you there. Another question is, if you agree to disagree and it's brought up again, does this show a recurrent pattern? And is this actually being fixed? How do you deal with that?
You know, that's a statement that's quite often used in the field of conflict resolution. Let's just agree to disagree. Well, that means that you're avoiding the conflict. You're totally avoiding it. And again, avoiding is not a bad thing if the conflict doesn't need to be resolved immediately. If you need to take some time to think about how you would like to resolve that conflict, it's time to avoid it and walk on. And also with competing and confronting, it's not bad unless you use it all the time. If something needs to be resolved quickly, immediately, then you need to compete. You need to confront it. You need to work on what is the answer to this question? What is the answer to this situation that is occurring? So agreeing to disagree is just the form of avoiding the conflict.
Okay. And what you were saying, there are different ways that it can be handled.
Mhm.
What would you say, this is my question, what would you say would be a good place to start in terms of language? So let's say there's an issue and people got really upset and that issue hasn't been resolved. What is even language that people can use to come back to engage in a conversation where they can try to resolve the conflict? Because I think one of the challenges is how people say things and not necessarily what they say, because what they say is communicating how they feel. You know, that's their truth that they want to communicate, but it's oftentimes the tones that we use, the looks that we give, our body language that sends another message that makes what we say kind of even amplifies it, or just sends another message.
Yes, positive language, as much positive language as you possibly can. And in the example that you just gave, I would just say, help me understand what's going on with you right now. Because that way they have to think about an answer. They have to think about what's going on with them. Because a lot of times we feel that we're in conflict, but it's not about us. It's about the other person. And symptoms are not always the cause. Symptoms are not always the cause of the conflict. You've got somebody that got up one morning, got in there, got up, soon as they got up, they stumped their toe. Okay. Then they go on, get ready for work, and then somebody cuts them off. By the time they get to work, they got some stuff going on. And so if they confront you with an issue about something and you like stepping back, whoa, what happened here? It wasn't that. It was that first initial piece of conflict that person had when they stumped their toe when they got up. Had nothing to do with you.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's such a good point that you bring up about sometimes it's not even about us and we can take things personally from other people that's not directed to us specifically. It's like you could take you out and put another person and it would be the same response that person has. So it's not you specifically. And it kind of brings me to a thought that a professor during med school shared, that in situations we have to think about all the different scenarios that could explain why something is happening versus kind of jumping to a conclusion and saying, this is why this person's acting this way. And you just gave us an explanation that this person could have, stubbed their toe. They, almost got in an accident. Someone cut them off. Like they have a lot of stuff that explains why it's not like they just got up one day and were angry.
Exactly.
Perfect. All right. Well, another question just came up, and this question's asking, are old conflicts within families worth resolving, or should it be confronted if people were hurt emotionally, or is moving on an unhealthy compromise? Just to say, you know what, we're just going to try to forget about it. I think that's what the question is asking.
Yes, absolutely. We see this in our families where you have estranged family members. It's all due to moving on and not really addressing the problem. And the thing that we have encountered in our families is that no one wants to reach out for help. No one wants to say, well, look, we've got this issue going on in our family. If we want to keep it in the family and not, broadcast it to everybody, maybe we can bring in a third party to mediate or to, help us work through this.
Right.
Which will be so much better than just holding those things inside. And it just tears the family apart when you have those type of issues. Now, if you have mental health issues, you still need to want to try to get help for that family member to help them resolve whatever is going on.
As a way to
I think it's better to go ahead and address it rather than just moving on.
I was curious about your, I guess, how would you make the case to someone or just share to individuals who don't really like the idea of a mediator or don't think that person's necessary to help with an issue? It's kind of seen as like, what does this person know, or how can this person help? How can you speak to individuals who don't really think that's going to be helpful to have someone else coming in to help resolve conflict issues?
Then they need to get the skills that they need themselves. They need to maybe have some conflict coaching on how to handle conflict and just get the tools and the skills that they need to address it themselves. And that's possible.
Oh, I just heard. Okay. Any other, let's just scroll through to see if there are any other questions that I can see. And actually, I do have another question that I just thought of. So so let's say that in a scenario, people have been hurt in a conflict and no one wants to be the first one to take that step. How do you advise family members or friends or whichever individuals who are in conflicts? How do you advise them to think about what actions they can take to try to improve the conflict? What's a way that they can think about, okay, yes, I am going to take this step to try to improve it, but that's a good thing versus why do I have to be the one that always takes the step? That kind of view of no one wants to be the first one. So what do you see to that?
Someone's got to speak up. Someone's got to be the first one to even want to address it. And so if they're unable to address it with the family or with anyone else, they need to try to get someone else that they can maybe take with them to open up the dialogue, to try to talk about what are some ways that we can work on this.
So they can try to look into again gaining some of those skills that will help them to be able to know how to approach those situations for themselves and overcome even their internal barriers that prevent them from taking those steps that they can.
Yeah, what's causing them to not want to address it right away? And how can I empower them to be able to step forward and say, this is what's going on, this is what we would like to see happen?
Great, thank you, Chris. And another question just popped up. Do you suggest avoiding some individuals who, no matter what, are just disagreeable to engage with?
Yes, if you have people like that, then there's something else going on. So then I would maybe refer them to Kendra to see if they could maybe work through whatever the issues are that they may be having in order to be available to try to manage or try to change the conflict or try to resolve the conflict. Because in most cases, if you have a person that is just totally unwilling to engage in a conflict or try to engage in the resolution of that conflict, then there are some underlying issues going on with them personally.
So I agree that when there are issues that need to be resolved internally, therapy is the best way to do that. Just like you have a cut physically, you have emotional cuts that need to be resolved, and you don't fix those by yourself if they're really deep. If you have an abscess, you go to the emergency department, you get that taken care of, and it has to, go through loads of pain to open it, but you'll heal on the other end of that. And I think of therapy as being that way for emotions too. The question I was just thinking of was, how do you respond to someone who says, well, I don't think I need help. I don't think I need help with therapy. I don't believe in that. I don't need to see anyone. Because that's one of the barriers, I think, to a lot of people being able to move to a place of healing, that their view of therapy is just, that's for people who are weak. That's for people who are crazy. That's for people who need help. I don't need any help.
Well, I would just have to ask them the question. So what else would you like to see happen? How else do you think you're going to be able to resolve the conflict? What would you like to see happen? What would you like to see happen? You're not wanting to go and talk with a neutral person about what's going on with you, then how else would you suggest this conflict be resolved? Because remember earlier, I talked about if that person is being combative, if that person is being resistant, then there's something internal that's going on with them. As I mentioned, the significant emotional events earlier. And Kendra can attest to this in her background, and that is our developmental stages of life. What ultimately happens during those developmental stages, if a significant emotional event occurs, we get stuck. And when we get stuck, unless another event happens to bring us out of it, say counseling or talking to someone or trying to resolve whatever that first event was, then we just continue to build on all of those events to the point that it does eventually result in some type of mental health issue. But if we grow up chronologically and physically, but if we're still stuck where that significant emotional event occurred, that's how our behavior occurs. You know, you've heard people say, oh my God, they acting childish. Why is that grown person acting like a child? Well, it's because they're stuck. They're stuck in some significant emotional event that occurred during their developmental stage in life.
And so therapy really is one of the most effective ways to help us kind of deal with that so we can move forward and really be the best of ourselves that we can. Perfect. So I have two more questions for you. One question is asking, how do you deal with conflict when a person is lying and when a person's lying, spreading lies?
How do we know it's a lie? How do we know that they're actually lying? We
That's a
don't
good
know
point.
that. Somebody may tell you something that you may not be familiar with, that you may not be comfortable with, but how do you know it's a lie? And a lot of times what happens when we feel someone is lying, or if we get that gut reaction when someone says something to us or about us, that's when we need to get in cognition and ask ourselves, is there any truth in it? Because normally when it affects us physiologically, there's some truth in it. So we have to check ourselves. I know a lot of people may not be moviegoers, but there was a movie out and it had a line in it that says, you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself. And that's true. It happens. So we need to be really cognizant of what really is a lie and what and how is that person lying. And if you do feel that a person is lying or spreading lies, you need to bring that person together and say, help me understand why these words are being said or why these things are being said about me. If they can't answer it, then you shouldn't worry about it. You should know yourself better to say whatever they're saying is not true. And you don't have to justify it. You need let your own behavior and your own character speak for you.
That's a great point right there. It's a good answer. This last question here says, can you remind me of the top 2 to 3 things that start resolving conflict? I guess 2 or 3 takeaway points about how to start resolving conflict.
Know who you are and whose you are is the first one. You need to stop and think about yourself and how you've managed conflict in the past and how you would like to see a conflict resolved. Get to know who you are, because that's where it all starts. The conflict is not always about the other person. A lot of times it's about, who yourself and where the conflict is actually coming from. Not responding to conflict so quickly and immediately, but thinking about what the conflict really is.
Excellent. So that was our last question. And we just want to say thank you so much, Chris, for sharing with us your expertise on this issue, which is this is a everybody issue. This is a everyday issue. This is a life issue, and the life skills that we need to learn for this are so important. So thank you so much for offering.